An uncle and his 7-year-old niece set off for a routine overnight camping trip in the Cascade Foothills, but they vanished from their campsite without a trace. Investigators were left with nothing but a single photograph and 5 baffling years of silence. The case finally broke when a base jumper's camera caught sight of their vehicle's mangled remains on a sheer cliff face. This discovery proved it wasn't just a disappearance, but the start of something far more sinister. The unease began not with a frantic phone call or a gruesome discovery, but with the persistent, unanswered ringing of a cell phone against the backdrop of a quiet Saturday night in Seattle. It was August 14, 2010. Zariah and Tristan Vance had just returned home from a rare, quiet dinner at a restaurant they had wanted to try for months. The arrangement had seemed perfect. Zariah's brother, 46-year-old Paxton Concaid, had offered to take their 7-year-old daughter, Zariah, on a single-night camping trip in the nearby Cascade Foothills. It was a tradition they had established. Paxton adored his niece, and the Vances appreciated the opportunity to reconnect as a couple. Paxton was expected to have Zariah back by Sunday morning, but he always checked in the night before. It was just past 9 p.m. when Zariah dialed his number. The call rang out, eventually clicking over to voicemail. She waited 10 minutes and tried again. Voicemail. Tristan, observing the tension beginning to tighten around his wife's eyes, suggested they might have simply driven into a dead zone. The Cascades were notorious for patchy cell service. Yet, the spot Paxton had chosen was not deep wilderness. It was a dispersed camping area, accessible, and usually reliable for at least intermittent signals. Paxton was meticulous about safety, especially when Zariah was with him. Woven into the fabric of this anxiety was the knowledge of Paxton's recent past. He was a solid, dependable man, a specialized vehicle fabricator who could build or fix nearly anything mechanical. But he had endured a grueling divorce 2 years prior, a process that had left him emotionally drained. Recently, however, things had been looking up. He had started dating a woman named Isolde, and Zariah had noted a renewed lightness in him. He was rediscovering his passion for the outdoors, often utilizing his customized white pickup truck fitted with a distinctive royal blue dome 10 attachment that spanned the truck bed. The last time Zariah had seen her brother and daughter was around 3 p.m. that afternoon. She and Tristan had driven up to the campsite to help them set up before heading back for their dinner reservation. The scene had been idyllic. The clearing was surrounded by dense fir trees, the air crisp with the scent of pine. The truck was parked, the tailgate down. Paxton, bald and smiling warmly in his olive green t-shirt and dark shorts, was sitting in the open tent. Zariah, vibrant in a magenta-pink baseball cap, blue shirt, and purple leggings, sat on the edge of the tailgate, resting on a lime-green foam sleeping mat. Zariah had snapped a photo of them high-fiving, a moment of pure, uncomplicated joy. A sturdy off-white cooler was visible near the corner of the truck bed. Shortly after capturing that image, Zariah and Tristan had hugged them goodbye and driven away. By 10 p.m., with every call still unanswered, a cold dread settled over Zariah. Her maternal instinct overwhelmed any rational explanation. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was profoundly wrong. The relaxed atmosphere of their dinner now felt jarring, indulgent. Tristan agreed. It was time to drive back up the mountain. The drive was tense, their headlights cutting through the oppressive darkness of the winding mountain roads. They spoke little, each lost in their own swirling anxieties, oscillating between mundane explanations, a flat tire, a dead battery, and darker, unspoken fears. When they finally reached the turnoff for the dispersed camping area, the gravel crunching under their tires, they braced themselves. They pulled into the clearing. The campsite was empty. There was no white pickup truck, no blue tent, no Paxton, no Zariah. The silence of the clearing was absolute. Tristan stepped out of the car, his flashlight beam sweeping across the dirt and gravel. There were faint tire tracks where the truck had been parked, but nothing else. No gear left behind, no signs of a struggle, no note. It wasn't just that Paxton and Zariah were missing. It was as if the entire campsite had been erased. The immediate, paralyzing mystery was not just the disappearance of 2 people, but the vanishing of a large, conspicuous vehicle from a mountain clearing without a trace. By midnight, Zariah and Tristan were standing at the counter of the local sheriff's office, their faces pale with shock. A missing persons report was filed, but the details were sparse and baffling. Paxton Concaid and Zariah Vance had disappeared into the Cascade night, leaving behind only a photograph taken hours earlier and an unsettling void. The first light of dawn on Sunday, August 15th, brought the full mobilization of search and rescue resources. The disappearance of a young child and a grown man along with their vehicle triggered an immediate high-priority response. The logistics, however, were daunting. The Cascade Range, while beautiful, presented a nearly impenetrable maze of logging roads, service trails, and sheer cliffs spanning thousands of square miles of dense, unforgiving terrain. The initial strategy focused on the immediate vicinity of the campsite. Ground teams began a grid search, meticulously combing through the dense underbrush, looking for any sign of disturbance, any discarded item, a piece of clothing, a wrapper, anything that might indicate a direction of travel or a struggle. The terrain was rugged, characterized by steep inclines, thick vegetation, and unstable footing, slowing the progress of even the most experienced searchers. They found nothing that suggested a confrontation had taken place at the campsite itself. The area was disturbingly clean. Simultaneously, air assets were deployed. Helicopters crisscrossed the valleys and ridges, their rotors echoing off the canyon walls. They scanned for the bright white gleam of the pickup truck or the distinctive blue of the tent. The primary assumption at this stage, given the missing vehicle, was that they were looking for an accident. A vehicle that had perhaps lost control on a winding road and plunged down an embankment. But the searches along the main roads and the visible service tracks yielded nothing. There were no skid marks, no broken guardrails, no disturbed foliage suggesting a vehicle had left the road catastrophically. The thick canopy of the forest made aerial observation extremely difficult, potentially concealing wreckage from view. The investigation quickly moved to digital footprints, the invisible markers of modern life. Detectives pulled the records for Paxton Concaid's cell phone. The data confirmed the timeline established by Era and Tristan. The last activity on Paxton's phone, a brief data ping to the nearest tower, occurred shortly after 3 p.m., around the time the Vances had left the campsite. After that, the phone was either turned off, destroyed, or moved out of service range. There was no financial activity on Paxton's accounts, no credit card usage, no ATM withdrawals. The digital trail went cold at the same moment the physical trail vanished. This sudden cessation of activity suggested a rapid and decisive event rather than a planned departure. For Era and Tristan, the days blurred into a waking nightmare. They remained at the command center, waiting for updates that never came, existing on coffee and adrenaline. Era, in particular, was tormented by a specific, agonizing guilt. The image of her and Tristan enjoying an expensive meal, laughing and relaxing, while somewhere, perhaps only miles away, something terrible was happening to her daughter and brother, was unbearable. That window of time, those few hours of respite, became a focal point of her torment. She replayed the events of that afternoon obsessively, questioning if she had missed a sign, a look, anything that suggested danger or unease in Paxton or Zariah. There was nothing but the memory of the high five. As the initial intensive search stretched into a week with zero results, the void of information began to be filled by speculation. In the small community surrounding the foothills, whispers started. People analyzed Paxton's life. He was recently divorced, a process that had been difficult. He was starting a new relationship with Isolde. Was it possible, some suggested quietly, that the pressure had become too much? Had Paxton, perhaps unstable despite his outward appearance, decided to disappear and taken his niece with him? These suggestions reached Era and Tristan, adding a layer of defensive pain to their grief. Era was fierce in her defense of her brother. She knew Paxton. He was gentle, reliable, and his love for Zariah was absolute. The idea that he would harm her or subject her to the trauma of a staged disappearance was unthinkable. She urged investigators to look outward, convinced that some unknown third party must be involved. Investigators, while obligated to consider all possibilities, found no evidence in Paxton's background to suggest instability or malicious intent. His new relationship with Isolde appeared healthy. Isolde herself was distraught and fully cooperative. Yet without evidence of foul play at the campsite, the theory of a familial abduction could not be entirely dismissed. The investigation needed a break, a physical clue to anchor the sprawling theories. 2 weeks into the search, it seemed they might have found one. A specialized tracking team focusing on less traveled logging roads located a set of tire tracks leading off a rough trail and down a steep, muddy embankment toward a fast-moving river. The discovery was made several miles from the original campsite in an area known for its treacherous river currents. Tire tracks matching Paxton's pickup galvanized the search effort. The horrifying possibility was that the truck had been swept away by the swollen river, which would explain its complete disappearance. A specialized dive team was called in. The recovery operation was both complex and dangerous. The river was frigid and murky, its waters swollen with snowmelt. Visibility was almost zero. Divers anchored themselves against the current, systematically searching the riverbed and navigating submerged logs and debris. After 2 painstaking days using sonar equipment, they located something large and metallic in a deep pool. Hopes surged at the command center. Era and Tristan braced for the devastating confirmation that the truck and likely Paxton and Zariah's remains had been found. The atmosphere was heavy with grim anticipation. Heavy lift equipment was brought in, straining against the object's weight and the current for hours. As the object finally breached the surface, water streaming off the rusted metal, a wave of disappointment washed over the rescue teams. It wasn't a pickup truck. It was a pile of old, illegally dumped appliances, refrigerators, washing machines, and other metallic waste. Upon closer inspection, the tire tracks were unrelated, likely from other illegal dumping. The river debris was a crushing blow to morale, underscoring the frustrating reality of the investigation. They were searching for a ghost in a landscape full of distractions. The hope that had flared so brightly was extinguished, leaving a deeper darkness. With winter approaching and no physical evidence, the sheriff's office made the difficult decision to scale back the active search. The harsh weather of the Cascades made large-scale operations impossible. The case remained open, but resources were reallocated. For Era and Tristan, the silence returned, deeper and more profound than before. The wilderness held its secrets tightly. The years that followed were an agonizing absence of answers. The case of Paxton Concaid and Zariah Vance faded from public consciousness, becoming another cold case file. It occasionally resurfaced in anniversary news segments, but otherwise remained dormant. For Era and Tristan, the trauma remained acute. They existed in a state of suspended animation, unable to grieve or move on. Zariah remained a 7-year-old girl in their minds. Her room was unchanged, her absence a constant physical ache. They marked birthdays and anniversaries with quiet, painful rituals, navigating the agonizing limbo of unresolved grief. In July 2015, 5 years had passed. Jarek Bannon wasn't looking for a missing persons case. He was looking for the perfect line. Bannon was an experienced wingsuit base jumper, part of an elite community that sought out the world's most challenging and remote cliffs. His travels brought him to the North Cascades, a region renowned for its dramatic vertical relief and rugged beauty. This was not the accessible foothills where the disappearance occurred. This was deep, unforgiving wilderness. The location he chose was far from the original search area, a massive granite cliff face with a sheer drop of thousands of feet, known for its complex wind patterns and technical difficulty. The jump required precise control and an intimate understanding of the environment. On the morning of July 22, 2015, Bannon stood at the exit point, the wind whipping around him. The sky was overcast, casting a flat, gray light over the landscape of rock and sparse vegetation. He wore a brightly colored wingsuit, orange, lime green, and blue, a stark contrast to the muted gray rock. His face was obscured by a white helmet and large, reflective goggles. He meticulously checked his equipment, focusing on the GoPro camera mounted to his helmet. These jumps were fleeting, intense experiences, and the footage was crucial for analyzing technique and capturing the flight. He took a deep breath and leapt into the void. The initial freefall was a rush of acceleration, the sound of the wind deafening. As he deployed his wingsuit, he began to fly, soaring through the mountain valley at over 100 miles per hour. The sensation was exhilarating, a high-speed dance with gravity. He hugged the contours of the cliff face, navigating the complex terrain with practiced ease, focused entirely on his line. Mid-flight, Bannon registered an anomaly, a flash of something out of place, a shape that didn't belong in the vertical world he was traversing. It was on a high, grassy ledge hundreds of feet below the clifftop, but still hundreds of feet above the valley floor. The location was utterly inaccessible by normal means. The glimpse lasted only a fraction of a second. At the speed he was traveling, he couldn't fully process the image, just a flicker of unnatural color and shape, white and brown, against the natural landscape. He mentally marked the location but couldn't divert his path to investigate. He continued his flight until he deployed his parachute and landed safely in the valley below. As he packed his gear, the image nagged at him. What had he seen? The location's isolation made any human presence unlikely. It registered as debris, but the shape felt too structured, too artificial. Back at his vehicle, Bannon pulled out his laptop and downloaded the GoPro footage. He scrubbed through the video, searching for the moment he'd glimpsed the anomaly. The high-definition footage provided a clear, if brief, view. He found the frame and zoomed in. The image resolved itself into a startling, grim discovery. It was a vehicle, a pickup truck, mangled, rusted, and perched precariously on the edge of the grassy ledge. The cab was crushed inward, the white paint stained with rust and caked on dirt. It was tilted at an unnatural angle, its front end smashed into the earth. Tangled in the wreckage was a tattered piece of faded blue fabric. Bannon stared at the screen, a chill cutting through the post-jump adrenaline. The truck's position made no sense. It was impossible for it to have reached that ledge accidentally. It must have fallen from the clifftop far above. The sheer violence of the impact and years of exposure to the elements suggested a long-forgotten tragedy. Recognizing the significance of his discovery, Bannon knew he had to report it. He marked the coordinates on his GPS and drove to the nearest town to contact the state police. The report reached the sheriff's office later that day. The description of the wreckage, the location, and the GoPro footage triggered an immediate response. The authorities analyzed the images, comparing them to the database of unresolved accidents and missing vehicles. The unique combination of the white pickup truck and the blue fabric generated a potential match. The realization was staggering. Could this be the vehicle that had vanished 5 years earlier? The location was extremely hazardous, far beyond the reach of conventional recovery methods. The discovery was a logistical nightmare. A specialized high-angle recovery team was assembled. The ghost on the cliff was about to reveal its secrets. The mobilization of the high-angle recovery team was swift, but the operation itself was anything but. The ledge where the wreckage rested was midway down a sheer granite cliff face, accessible only by advanced rappelling and rope access techniques. The operation would be inherently dangerous, requiring meticulous planning in an environment where a single mistake could be fatal. The team established a base camp on the ridgeline directly above the wreckage. The terrain was rugged, and the wind was unpredictable. They secured their ropes and harnesses, meticulously checking anchor points driven into the solid rock. The atmosphere was tense. They weren't just recovering evidence. They were entering a scene that had remained undisturbed for 5 years, a silent testament to an unknown event. The rappel down to the ledge was slow and deliberate. The cliff face was unstable in places, sending showers of loose shale and granite down into the valley. The team members, burdened with heavy equipment and forensic kits, descended slowly, their movements precise and calculated. The sound of cracking rock echoed across the valley. As the team reached the ledge, they encountered the wreckage exactly as it appeared in the GoPro footage. The scene was eerie, a tableau of sudden violence frozen in time. The white pickup truck was a mangled shell, crushed by the impact and ravaged by the elements. The rust was deep and pervasive, the metal oxidized and brittle. The tires were disintegrated, the metal rims embedded in the grassy earth. The remnant of the blue tent, once vibrant, was now a faded, shredded piece of fabric clinging stubbornly to the wreckage. The first priority was to secure the scene and assess the wreckage's stability. The truck was tilted precariously close to the edge of the ledge. The team worked carefully, securing the vehicle with cables anchored to the rock face. Once the scene was secured, the investigation began. The first order of business was to confirm the vehicle's identity. A team member meticulously scraped away rust and debris from the dashboard to uncover the VIN plate, which was then relayed to the command center. Confirmation came back almost immediately. It was Paxton Concaid's missing truck. After 5 years, the primary piece of evidence had been found in the most unlikely of places. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation and delivered an agonizing confirmation of Zariah and Tristan Vance's worst fears. Yet, it also sparked a glimmer of hope for answers. With the truck's identity confirmed, a new question arose. Where were Paxton and Zariah? The recovery team began a systematic search of the truck's interior. The cab was crushed and compressed by the impact, so they had to carefully cut through the metal, bracing themselves for the possibility of finding human remains. The interior was full of dirt, leaves, and decayed camping gear. After sifting through the contents, they discovered the truck was empty. No bodies, no skeletal remains, no fragments of clothing. A wider search of the surrounding ledge yielded the same results. There was no indication that Paxton or Zariah had been ejected from the vehicle during the fall or scattered by scavengers. This absence was a critical turning point. It immediately shifted the investigation's focus. If the two weren't in the truck, this wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate act of disposal. The next step was to figure out how the truck reached the ledge. Investigators surveyed the area directly above the wreckage and found a rarely used, overgrown service road running along the edge of the cliff. It provided access to the exact point where the truck must have been launched into the void. The conclusion was undeniable. Someone had driven the truck to this remote location and intentionally pushed it over the cliff. With a likely homicide and abduction now on their hands, a forensic team was immediately dispatched to the ledge. They knew they had to analyze the truck in its current state before a heavy-lift helicopter could airlift it, a complex and dangerous task. The forensic examination focused on the exterior, looking for signs of contact with another vehicle. The fall had caused extensive damage, making it difficult to distinguish from any prior contact. However, a highly unusual pattern of deep, horizontal scraping was found on the rear bumper. This damage was inconsistent with the fall, and embedded within the scrapes were metallic particles and a unique shade of reinforced gray paint, an industrial-grade coating, not standard automotive paint. This evidence was a game-changer. It suggested another vehicle had made forceful, sustained contact with the back of Paxton's truck. Accident reconstruction specialists analyzed the evidence, the trajectory of the fall, and the terrain of the service road. Their conclusion was definitive. The truck had been deliberately pushed over the cliff. The nature of the damage and paint transfer pointed to a specific scenario. A vehicle with a custom, heavy-duty push bar or bumper rig had positioned itself near the edge and then accelerated into Paxton's truck, forcing it into the abyss. This pointed to a perpetrator with specific intent and specialized equipment, not a random act of violence. It was a calculated effort to dispose of evidence in a location where it was never meant to be found. The investigation now had a clear focus: identify the vehicle used to push the truck and the person behind the wheel. The specialized paint transfer was the first tangible clue. A thread that investigators hoped would lead them to the person responsible. The mystery of what happened to Paxton and Zariah remained, but for the first time in 5 years, investigators had a direction. The recovery of the truck transformed the cold missing persons case into an active homicide and abduction investigation overnight. The primary objective was identifying the vehicle used to push Paxton's truck over the cliff and, by extension, the person who drove it. The crucial evidence was the specialized industrial paint transfer found on the rear bumper. The unique shade of reinforced gray and the metallic particles suggested a specific type of heavy-duty equipment. Forensic labs confirmed it was an epoxy-based coating used in industrial fabrication and heavy machinery, not a commercially available product. Investigators began the painstaking process of tracing the paint. They compiled a list of local companies that used this type of coating, focusing on those involved in heavy equipment repair, custom vehicle fabrication, and industrial maintenance. The list was extensive, but the uniqueness of the paint provided a narrow filter. As they cross-referenced the list, a startling connection emerged. Paxton Concaid's profession as a vehicle fabricator placed him directly within this specialized world. This unsettling realization opened a new line of inquiry. Authorities began a discreet investigation into his firm, searching for anyone with the skills and equipment to build the custom push bar and a motive to harm Paxton. The firm specialized in the very type of modifications suggested by the evidence, including the installation of heavy-duty bumpers and specialized equipment mounts. Initial interviews with Paxton's co-workers yielded little. He was well-liked and respected, and there were no obvious conflicts. However, detectives needed to delve deeper into Paxton's personal life at the time of his disappearance. They re-interviewed Isolde Auer, the woman Paxton had been dating in 2010. Still haunted by his disappearance, Isolde initially hesitated. She recalled their relationship as a positive time, but as she revisited her memories, she remembered something that had seemed insignificant at the time, but now took on a darker tone. She mentioned an unsettling coworker of Paxton's who seemed overly fixated on her. She had met him briefly at a company event, and he had made her uncomfortable with his intense stare. Paxton had dismissed it, assuring her the man was harmless, just socially awkward. But Isolde recalled Paxton mentioning that the coworker seemed resentful of their relationship, making passive-aggressive comments about Paxton's renewed happiness. The name Isolde provided was Jasper Redcliffe. Jasper Redcliffe was a brilliant but solitary fabricator at the firm. He was known for his meticulous custom work and his unsettling, quiet demeanor. Coworkers confirmed that Redcliffe had developed a subtle but persistent obsession with Isolde after meeting her. He had asked about her repeatedly and monitored her online presence. The emergence of Redcliffe as a potential suspect provided the crucial element of motive. His skills and access to the fabrication workshop provided the means, but investigators needed concrete evidence linking him to the crime. The focus turned to Redcliffe's activities around the time of the disappearance. He lived alone, had no criminal record, and his personal vehicle did not match the specialized rig suggested by the evidence. However, investigators considered the possibility that Redcliffe had used company resources. If he had built the custom push bar at the workshop using the specialized paint available there, he might have also used a company vehicle to carry out the crime. This line of inquiry led to a critical breakthrough. Instead of focusing solely on personal records, investigators pulled the archived GPS data logs for the company's fleet vehicles from 2010. The firm maintained a fleet of heavy-duty trucks equipped with GPS tracking systems, but this data had not been examined previously. The logs contained thousands of entries, but investigators focused on the weeks leading up to the disappearance, looking for any anomalies related to the vehicle assigned to Jasper Redcliffe. The data revealed a chilling pattern of behavior. Redcliffe's assigned company truck showed repeated visits to the areas where Paxton frequently camped. The GPS coordinates placed the truck near the dispersed camping area on multiple occasions in the weeks before the disappearance. Redcliffe was stalking Paxton, learning his routines, and identifying locations where he would be vulnerable. The realization that Redcliffe had been hunting Paxton was disturbing, but the most damning evidence was found in the logs from the night of the disappearance. On the night of August 14, 2010, Jasper Redcliffe's company truck GPS logs show him heading toward the campsite where Paxton and Zariah were staying. The logs then track the truck deep into the North Cascades, following an old, seldom-used service road. The truck stops on a clifftop directly above where the wreckage of Paxton's truck was later found. It remains there for about 45 minutes before driving off. Maintenance records for the truck reveal that soon after the disappearance, the front bumper and push bar were replaced, reportedly due to damage on a job site. The damaged parts were conveniently disposed of, preventing any direct physical comparison. However, the digital evidence was undeniable. Jasper Redcliffe was at the disposal site. The combination of his motive, the means to commit the crime, and this damning digital evidence built a compelling case against him. The investigation now had a prime suspect. His hidden obsession with Paxton had been exposed, recorded in the ghost logs of a company vehicle. The focus shifted to finding Redcliffe and confronting the terrifying truth of what he'd done. But what had happened to Zariah? The evidence suggested Paxton was the primary target, but Zariah's presence complicated the story. The hope that she, now 12 years old, might still be alive suddenly felt agonizingly real. The case against Redcliffe, while circumstantial, was overwhelming. The GPS logs provided a precise digital map of his movements, linking him directly to the crime. Paint fragments on Paxton's truck were consistent with materials from Redcliffe's workplace. His motive, his obsession with his older brother and resentment of Paxton, provided the psychological reason for the violence. The investigation entered a new, urgent phase in early 2016. Detectives began 24-hour surveillance on Redcliffe, tracking him from his isolated apartment to the fabrication firm and back. They needed to know if Zariah was still alive and in his care. Redcliffe lived a solitary, almost monastic life in a small apartment in an industrial area of Seattle. His routine was unchanged since the disappearance. He had minimal contact with coworkers and ate lunch alone. There were no signs of a child in his life, no school records, no doctor appointments, no indication he was caring for a 12-year-old girl. The surveillance teams watched relentlessly, but Redcliffe was meticulous and controlled. His existence was a closed loop, with no visible cracks. The lack of any sign of Zariah was deeply troubling. Investigators had to face the grim possibility that she too had been murdered. Yet, without a body, they held on to the hope that she was alive, hidden somewhere the surveillance couldn't reach. To understand how Redcliffe could conceal a child for over 5 years, investigators dove into his background and skills. They discovered his expertise went beyond vehicle fabrication. He specialized in maintaining and repairing remote industrial equipment. His job required him to travel frequently, often alone, to isolated sites like pumping stations, relay towers, and decommissioned facilities. He operated independently with little oversight, familiar with these environments and their security protocols. This realization shifted the investigation's focus from his apartment to the vast network of industrial infrastructure across the Pacific Northwest. If Zariah was alive, she was likely not in a traditional home, but in a remote, secure location, hidden within the very infrastructure he was paid to maintain. Investigators cross-referenced Redcliffe's travel logs with property records and financial data, looking for any location he visited regularly or owned. They made a startling discovery. Shortly after the 2010 disappearance, Redcliffe had leased a decommissioned water treatment facility in a remote part of the state, hundreds of miles from Seattle. Accessible only by a long, gated service road, it was a massive complex of concrete buildings, tanks, and underground tunnels, surrounded by high fences and razor wire. Leased under the guise of an equipment storage and fabrication workshop, the facility was a perfect prison, isolated, secure, and under Redcliffe's control. Its scale and complexity suggested a terrifying level of premeditation. Zariah might not be in a house, but isolated within this massive industrial structure. As a tactical team planned to breach the facility, investigators continued analyzing the 2010 GPS logs, focusing on Redcliffe's movements after leaving the clifftop. They needed to find Paxton Concaid's remains to close the homicide case. The logs showed Redcliffe drove back toward the original campsite and stopped for several hours in a remote, wooded area near a service road. The duration and location suggested a burial site. A specialized search team with cadaver dogs was sent to the precise location provided by the GPS data. After hours of searching the dense forest, one of the dogs alerted near a large boulder. The team began a careful excavation. Buried in a shallow grave, they found human remains. Dental records confirmed the identity, Paxton Concaid. Forensic analysis determined the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. The evidence suggested he was murdered at the campsite, his body transported and buried before Redcliffe disposed of the truck. The discovery of Paxton's remains added new urgency to the operation at the water treatment facility. If Redcliffe was capable of such calculated violence, Zariah was in extreme danger. The tactical team finalized their plan to enter an industrial prison and confront a man who had hidden a child from the world for over 5 years. The operation to breach the decommissioned water treatment facility began in the early hours of a March 2016 morning. Under the cover of darkness, the tactical team assembled at the gated service road. The facility was a daunting, sprawling concrete monolith against the natural landscape, a maze of industrial infrastructure controlled by a highly intelligent suspect on his home turf. The objective was clear: rescue Zariah Vance and apprehend Jasper Redcliffe. The team moved swiftly, cutting locks and securing the perimeter. Inside, the facility was silent. The interior was a cavernous space of massive filtration tanks, complex pipes, and metal catwalks. As they moved methodically through the administrative offices and control room, the facility seemed deserted. But the intelligence suggested Redcliffe was likely inside and watching. Suddenly, the facility came alive. The hiss of hydraulics and the clang of metal echoed as heavy machinery engaged. Redcliffe was aware of the breach and was using the facility's automated systems to obstruct their progress. Massive motorized valves closed, heavy steel doors slammed shut, and high-pressure steam filled corridors. Redcliffe was turning the facility itself into a weapon, using the infrastructure against the intruders. The standoff became a tense, dangerous pursuit. The tactical team had to adapt quickly, using specialized tools to breach locked doors and navigate the hazardous environment. The radio signals were distorted by the dense concrete and metal. As they moved through the chaos, alarms blaring around them, they knew Zariah was somewhere inside, and every second counted. The pursuit ended in the primary filtration chamber, a massive underground space. The team cornered Redcliffe near one of the huge tanks. He was armed with a heavy industrial tool, a metal pipe. His expression was defiant and desperate. He resisted violently, lunging at the nearest officer, but the team quickly overwhelmed and subdued him. With Redcliffe in custody, the focus shifted to finding Zariah. The team began a systematic search, calling her name, the sound absorbed by the massive structure. They were looking for any hidden rooms or compartments, any sign of human habitation. Deep inside the facility, they found a retrofitted, soundproofed control room hidden behind a concealed access panel. The team breached the door, revealing a profoundly unsettling scene. The room was sterile and brightly lit, a stark contrast to the dark, cavernous facility. It was meticulously organized with an independent air filtration system and fully stocked with supplies, a self-contained, gilded cage within the industrial prison. Inside, they found Zariah, a 12-year-old girl, pale and thin, sitting with her back to the door at a small desk. She remained perfectly still, staring at the blank wall, completely unresponsive to the sudden intrusion. The breach, the noise, the presence of the armed tactical team, nothing registered. She was physically alive, yet the unsettling stillness and silence suggested a deep disassociation from reality. Approaching her with caution, the team spoke in calm, reassuring tones, but she did not acknowledge their presence. Evidence in the room showed the extent of her psychological manipulation. Redcliffe had created an isolated world where he was her only human contact and absolute authority. The room was filled with carefully curated books, toys, and educational materials, all designed to control her perception of reality. He had subjected her to over 5 years of intense control and abuse, shaping her world to fit his twisted narrative. The rescue was a success, but the victory was agonizing. Zariah was physically safe, but the damage was unimaginable. The extraction from the facility was slow and careful, with the team keenly aware of the profound trauma she had endured. The silence of the industrial prison was finally broken, but Zariah Vance remained silent. The extraction from the water treatment facility was handled with extreme caution, with medics specializing in severe trauma and captivity on site. Zariah remained unresponsive during the journey, her gaze fixed on an internal world the rescuers couldn't penetrate. The transition to the outside world, the sunlight, the noise, the presence of so many people, was a sensory overload for a child who had spent 5 years in a controlled, isolated existence. She was immediately taken to a specialized trauma facility in Seattle, equipped to handle the complex aftermath of long-term captivity. News of her rescue spread quickly, bringing a mix of relief and profound sorrow. The 5-year mystery had been solved, but the reality of what Zariah had endured was more horrific than anyone had imagined. Era and Tristan Vance were waiting at the facility when she arrived. The reunion was agonizing. They were led into a quiet room where their daughter sat before them, physically recognizable, yet a stranger, shaped by years of unimaginable trauma. Zariah didn't recognize them. As Era, tears streaming down her face, gently touched her daughter's hand, the girl flinched and pulled away, her eyes vacant, looking through her mother rather than at her. Tristan stood frozen, his hands trembling as he whispered, "Zariah, it's Dad." But his words dissolved into the sterile air, unheard and unprocessed. Zariah remained perfectly still, her posture rigid, as if waiting for permission to move or speak, habits ingrained by years of absolute control. The connection had been severed by Redcliffe's systematic manipulation and abuse. The moment wasn't one of joyful reunion, but the beginning of a long, uncertain journey toward recovery, a confrontation with the profound extent of the damage inflicted on their child. In the aftermath of the rescue, investigators continued their grim work. Paxton Concaid's remains were returned to his family, and he was laid to rest in a private ceremony, remembered as a loving brother and uncle who had died protecting his niece. Jasper Redcliffe was charged with the first-degree murder of Paxton Concaid and the kidnapping and abuse of Zariah Vance. The evidence against him was overwhelming: GPS logs, paint transfers, the discovery of Paxton's remains, and the horrific reality of Zariah's captivity. He offered no explanation or remorse, remaining silent in the same isolation he had imposed on his victim. He was eventually convicted on all counts and sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The case was officially closed. The mystery of the vanishing in the Cascades had been solved. But while the agonizing uncertainty of her fate had ended, the full extent of the damage to Zariah remained unknown. Her future was a new kind of void, one her family now faced with a mix of hope and terror.